welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to be talking about monster hunting for science, refugee healing, and goal making, hope setting with your players here on Rise of the GM. Hey, Adam, we are here again today with some exciting stuff to talk about as far as goals and hopes. I really think this is going to be a fun conversation today. And we've got an NPC and an encounter as always. But how are you doing this fine Thursday?
Doing pretty well. It's a nice day outside. There was one day this week that I felt like I got like soaked by rain like 4 times in one day. And so today is much better.
All week. And I think tomorrow's supposed to be rain again for the next 2 days, at least here. The weird part is it's a beautiful day outside, and I have been sitting here on my computer all day in front of this camera.
It's tough. I luckily got to walk for a while. I went out onto campus and got some air, and that was good. But I do like a good rain, like a good soak. You know, it's like soup weather. That soup comes on and everything.
Yes.
But
we had on Monday, it was like a high of 72, but a low of 50. And I know that like when that's spring, everybody's like, it's a heat wave. But when we're coming out of summer, you're like, oh, we're going into fall. And so my wife made soup. And we're all like, hey, this is good soup weather. It was nice.
Monday was our soup day too. First soup of the fall. So,
there you go, everybody. If you haven't made your soup yet, get out there and make it because it's time. It is soup time.
Yeah. Doing pretty well otherwise. I'm excited. I think this is a good one to talk through. So it'll be good.
Yeah. It's funny because we're talking about setting hopes and goals with your players. And just this week, Adam, not even thinking about lining these two up, he sent out a thing to all of us in our normal game. He's the GM. And he sent out a thing saying, hey, what's your character's goals, and hopes and stuff. And I got on and I had to sadly confess that I had not sent him my answers to that. So everybody do better than your host on Rise of the GM.
Better player practice.
When your GM asks you for your hopes and goals, respond. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
But first.
I did think that was fun. I just thought it was funny because you mentioned that and I'm like, I must have subconsciously taught myself something and then decided to follow through on it as we were thinking through this.
On your mind.
Cool. But this is the good thing is I may bring this up later, but we have some time. That's the good part of this is I want these from people, but it's there's time still.
Oh, so, wait till you hear what we talk about today. You're gonna change everything. It's gonna be crazy.
I do love when we have these conversations and I go home and rewrite the game for the night kind of thing. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. Nice.
Well, we're going to start with an encounter starter, as we often do, from the Gnome Stew book, Eureka, 501 encounter starters. And we're talking today about one called Weird Science. I'm going to read it, and then we'll go from there. A scientist is experimenting on monstrous creatures, creating monster repellents, charms to exert control over them, all of that sort of stuff. He needs parts from certain creatures in order to complete his experiments, but his assistants have run off due to the danger involved because they're just normal people. They're not players. They're not adventurers and heroes, right? They didn't want to be involved in this. He's currently now looking for new and braver assistants. Now, the PCs may meet him because one of the party members is a monstrous creature from whom he tries to take a sample and then, has to apologize and whatever. Or they run into him in a bar and he's sitting there, bemoaning the lack of good help that he can find to get this stuff. Or they find himself in an unexpected fight with a captured creature that escapes its bonds. So he had a creature he was trying to get stuff from and experiment on, and it got loose and they end up helping him get it back. Whatever it is, once met, the scientist will try to hire the party to help him capture creatures or acquire certain parts and byproducts of creatures. The experimenter will send the PCs after a lot of different kinds of creatures, right? Tagging along and offering humorous advice the whole time. And I always, in my mind, I think of him as any of you in here, Futurama fans, the old, I guess he was the scientist, right? So he'll be there the whole time saying stuff like, the fourth spleen on the left, that's the one we're after. Or the weak point is in his pinky finger. Or his spit tastes like marmalade, and the whole time he's like saying these goofy things and kind of sending you off after these crazy monsters. He always rewards the party well for these hunts. But he gets upset when vital parts or limbs are destroyed. He's like, the second set of arms on the centipede was the ones I was after. You nincompoops, go do it again, And so he's very eccentric, right? And unaware of the danger that he's putting others in by asking for these things. But the cool thing is he creates hunts for creatures that are exotic, that your group might never in other settings come into contact with on their other adventures. And you can even run this adventure, it says here, straight from the Book of Monsters as a side quest. And I thought this was really interesting to me. You just grab this Book of Monsters and you can just open it to anything and point and be like, this is, what I need next. I need, the left, back wing from this thing, and anyway, you can drop them in as hunts whenever players are absent or you need a quick adventure. This is kind of a cool thing because he can be this kind of recurring character that your party knows. But after sufficient monster hunts, the final confrontation in this adventure arc is a combat with a large, terrifying, unique creature. As the final piece of his project, the experimenter needs this thing alive, right? So it can't be something you bring in just a piece or a part. He needs the whole thing alive. And so he has this sedative that he's created that can knock it out. And the scientist doses the creature early in the combat, but the dose is either too weak or he didn't account for the size of it or whatever. And success is going to require controlling the situation and protecting the scientist while he has to get in another shot of this tranquilizer. And the creature should be capable of multiple attacks. And he's going to attack and target the experimenter every round if the PCs don't control the battle well. Once the creature is defeated, the experimenter will offer extra non-monetary rewards to the party, like fixing an ailment or boosting a stat or providing a formula that gains them a monster-based ability, whatever you want it to be as the GM. And so that's the whole thing. You got this crazy experimenter who needs monster parts, who comes in contact with the players, and then you keep him around for as long as necessary, and he gets to throw really unique monsters into your adventure parties. And then at the end, they have to get something that is totally unique and crazy and capture it alive while he's in there, offering these crazy comments and trying to sedate the thing. So what do you think of this kind of encounter starter?
Yeah, I think it's fun. I like this a lot. I think it could, I was trying to think through like different styles of play with this kind of thing. It's like, what are you doing at your table? And I think it's usable no matter what you're doing. If you're doing like a more epic arc style, I think this is a good person to like slide into the mix. And
for those weeks when you need it to not be so like tense and climbing.
Right. Yeah. You can be a little more low key with it, or like it can be an early on kind of thing where you're almost like allowing people to interact with the world and create some space there and do those kind of things and build up. I like the idea in that case of it being almost, you could play with some foreshadowing of like, maybe there's some stuff going on with these creatures that like later it's like, well, hey, like when we dealt with the fourth spleen of this thing, that reminds me of what's going on with this like way huger situation, and I think you could do that kind of stuff. But I think it'd be like really good for if you're like doing some episodic things, or if you're doing the hex crawl kind of stuff, like, he is sending you out into the wild to hunt these creatures out, and you're discovering, that comes up for me again, where it's like, oh, I get to discover these places and creatures and all this stuff going on as I'm going after these monsters. So I think it would like fit really well, and especially well in those kind of realms.
And I think it's really good if you have a party that you're trying to let them guide so that it doesn't feel like you're railroading them, but they just aren't coming up with anything. No hook is catching with them.
Right.
This is a great way to kind of send them to some places, and then like based on the things that begin to catch their attention, it can lead to, what you're wanting to do in your adventure. You have to be a little creative to kind of make that transition. But
absolutely.
We used to have a game where we would come back to this city over and over, and there was always this guy named Stoit who would make us eggs. And I think having those kinds of recurring characters
Yeah.
that are oddball, but you always come back to them, and they always kind of have something for you. Now, yeah, again, making eggs is not the greatest thing. I can't remember if he gave us other benefits or something, but somebody like this guy,
Yeah.
he needs things, but he can also, due to that, you can
Mm.
get kind of boons and
Yeah.
items and relics and cures and
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
you wouldn't have gotten before. And so it's kind of a neat character to be able to throw in as a GM. So you have it like, I need an encounter for tonight. Well, that's great
Right.
because you can just pull out the monster manual and
Hmm.
flip it over, boom. Or you can like pick some out in advance so that you
Yeah.
like can really kind of make some neat encounters. But at the same time, it doesn't detract from your overall what you want to do with your story. He's
Right.
totally a support kind of character, and I like that.
Yeah, yeah. I think the recurring character idea you brought up is right on with this. It's like fun to have that, and this is like one that makes sense to be like living in your world. To me, um, for some reason. So, well, a couple different directions. I don't know where it came from. Like, I feel like I remember doing it as my bard in your Oracle of Order game, but like the idea of like knowledge monster, like a knowledge monster check. I
Hmm.
don't know exactly where that popped up for us as like a table, and it's like spanned multiple groups of people, with that. But I know that comes up even now sometimes where it's like, I'd really like to figure out what's going on with this creature that I've never seen before. Could I like try to look back on some info in my brain and see if like I've ever heard any rumors or anything? And I think this guy, like, one, he's a font of knowledge as you're like building this. He's understanding how creatures work, and it's like, oh, if you shoot them in the the smallest toe of the left foot, that's kind of the Achilles heel of this thing, and that could actually give a bonus or a boon. But then even like maybe he gifts them a book of, it's a creaturepedia, and like you can probably not in the middle of the battle sit down and start like flipping through, but like if you're prepping, or maybe a boost to like a ranger type who is like going after specific creatures. It's like, this is my favored enemy, or having some more boosts like that. I think that's really, really cool. Rob saying the book Heliana's Guide to Monster Hunting is a really good source. Need to check that out too, for that kind
One,
of thing. But this smacks for me a lot of, which means nothing to a lot of people probably, but it smacks so much of red markets. Like, this feels very red markety to me. I think because of it triggered with the thing where it's like, maybe you have a monstrous PC who the person tries to run a test on, and I'm sure you've been through with me, Matthew, before. It's actually out of the book. It's like a random encounter kind of thing, or random leg. But it's like when the Crusaders are like medical people who are trying to figure out how to fix the blight, and they do
right.
really terrible things to do that. And one of those legs is like, if you have like a latent in your party, they really want to get bodily fluids from that, like blood and marrow and stuff like that, to like do tests and also try to make things out of. And that this whole thing feels like the kind of person in a red markets game that would be like, oh, you need jobs to do? Well, I have jobs for you. I need you to go out and
Yeah.
collect, 4 casualties for me and herd them back here so that we can do some stuff. Or I need you to go here and there's an aberrant we've heard of, and I need you to go to get a sample of it, and not die, hopefully, kind of thing. That feels really like that for me too. So I think it could definitely span not just like fantasy genre, but you can use that idea, into that. But I think I cut you off. Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
ideas coming. So I don't think it's any secret to people who've been watching this that I've gotten into this huge lit RPG
Hmm.
reading kick. And I just started a new series called the
Oh,
Unbound series. I'll just kind of throw that out for anybody. I'll say this: when it first started, I'm like, I don't know about this writing, but it gets better as the
huh.
book goes on. It feels a
Yeah.
little like easy at the beginning. But anyway, you got this guy who basically gets and I'm sure there's other books that deal with this, but he gets this ability called Gourmand, I think, where when he like eats or drinks part of the monster, he can like begin to
Huh.
develop a skill that they have. Sometimes he gets those skills, and so he's like everybody else has kind of a set skill path, and he's like all over the place with these weird monster skills. But that's the kind of thing I think this guy could do in your party. I'm all about like getting away from like characters that look like characters in every D&D game you will ever
Mm,
see, and they follow the same progression. And if you look at a level 20 in your game, Ranger or,
yeah.
Artificer or whatever, it's going to look like the same as in these
Mm,
other games. I'm all for getting away from that and giving unique stuff. So I'm
mm,
always kind of like home brew adding
yeah, yeah,
stuff
right.
as a GM. Don't be afraid of this. Do know that means you're probably in a high power game. Everybody always loves my games because I'm high power epic. I give people lots of stuff, but everything they fight is huge. But what I would do in this, not every time, but this guy would be able to like extract these things from their blood or from their whatever, and give these potions, and occasionally he will be able to give one to your characters that would then give them some form of something this monster could do. Like for instance,
Mm,
if this monster has an ice aura or something, you would get like a 1d6 right around you in 5 foot square. Anybody who's 5 next to you, they begin to take this because you
yeah.
have gotten this potion that then makes alive in you this, or dark tendrils that shoot out, like Spider-Man from this shadow creature that
Oh, yeah, yeah,
uses
yeah.
dark tendrils, and you can do something. Now you got to be careful not to make it too powerful. Don't make it as
Right.
powerful as maybe the monster itself has, but like a reminiscent thing that gives your characters some uniqueness, and then they can build those things, they can grow those things.
Mm,
But man, when you get to the end of your character arc, this fighter is not just going to look like a fighter. He's going to look like a
right.
fighter with some different sorts of,
Yeah.
and you get to choose because you can pick whatever unique monster you want, and you can pick, this is the exact thing that this guy is going to distill out. And
Mm,
it gives you a chance as a GM to like really give your players some cool things, that is going to change their character's story and progression and all of that stuff.
right.
So I really like this kind of on-hand encounter with this
Right.
kind of character, with this kind of ability,
Hmm.
that then even later, it can have like this cap thing, that like, hey, this is
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
be, and who knows what happens when you catch this thing alive and you
Mm,
finally get it back, and it's like his capstone of whatever he's been doing your entire campaign. Be creative with what
yeah,
that's
yeah.
going to do in your campaign. It doesn't have to like be the big thing in your campaign.
Right.
You may still be working on this prophecy or on this whatever it is, but that's going to be something cool to add in.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
I super
Mm.
like this one, and don't be surprised if the next time I start a campaign, you guys meet some dude who's a monster. Because I just thought this was such a cool idea.
I'll not add it in tonight.
If you do, mine will be different. I'll try
True.
to. You'll be like, yeah, yours is going to be. By the way, Rob Henry came for the assist here. He told me Professor Farnsworth is the name I was looking
Hmm.
for. Good news, everyone! You're fired.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's good for our encounter starter. Hopefully that sparks some ideas and some cool thoughts for you for your campaign and what you might do. But let's move on to our main topic of today,
Yeah.
and that is setting goals and hopes with your players.
With the players. Yeah. Yeah. So this kind of in this non-series situation, but just kind of talking through different like kind of interactions with people and um how this kind of works out. And I think it's like a really important piece of our like GM
Something that
kind of
new
role,
GMs don't
right?
always think about
Yeah,
too.
right.
They think,
Yeah.
okay, I have to come up with monsters,
Hmm.
and I have to come up with environments and
Yeah.
maps, and they can do that
Yeah.
and not ever think about this part.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think like, I asked myself a lot of questions, this week as I was kind of like thinking through this, and it's like the why of this kind of deal. I think like you said, like there's these things that we think through, okay, like I got to make sure there's some combats prepped and a map, and maybe we come in and we're like thinking either I need to populate this world so they can find things as they discover it, or there's like this arc I'm trying to push for and all this stuff. But there's some things that this does that I think are really important. Like one of them is the player investment into things, or like
Mhm.
ownership, is another way of I think saying that is if I bring to the table like this is my story, completely like people may buy into that, but there's going to be a like, well, we're living in Adam's world in some ways, and there's a lot you can do to help bring people into that. But I think like having stuff that the players are bringing to the table and saying like, this is a thing I actually want to go for as a character, or like, this is the hopes and dreams of Cormac, kind of thing. And like what I hope for in that, like you can play into that role. Um, I've brought this up before, but like the idea of like story fodder, I don't know how
Mhm.
many, I'm not going to rehash all of them, but there's so many things where it's like somebody brings up a thing either in game or outside a game about like, this is kind of what my character is interested in. And it's like, that's a whole arc. They can just go and take on a life of its own because you brought this idea to my mind that I never would have thought of beforehand.
And it doesn't
Um,
mean that you like scrap what you're doing,
yeah, right.
but like as you already kind of have an end goal in mind, sometimes when people bring you their
Mhm.
ideas of what they want their character to do,
Yeah,
it can inspire you in how to integrate those into where you were already going.
for sure. Yeah, like that integrates a great word. Like how does this intertwine with what's already happening? It may veer out and come back, or edit as things go. And just like world building too. Like I think there's cool things when people start making these things. Okay, it's like I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna think through what Pressy hopes for, like what does my ranger want in life, kind of thing. And if I start feeding that to you, Matthew, like as a GM, then there's like I may come up with like, oh yeah, like I have this village up in the mountains that I'm from, and this is something I really hope was going to happen. The whole point was about protection, and you're like, oh, there's a village up in the mountains at Press. It's like that wasn't there before, but now is because of
Hmm.
just trying to think through these things. So that's a huge help, I think, is like good reasons for goals. The biggest one for me, I think, is the investment ownership thing. Like that's like a real draw for me to like have these kind of conversations with people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think there are we're talking about goals, and I think
Hmm.
the first thing we should do is kind of break down that there are different kinds of goals.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've noticed Adam do particularly well, that I didn't always do well, but then I start thinking, hey, I want to integrate this kind of thing, is breaking down what are you guys wanting to do, like, and I'll just go ahead and break them down. The kind of immediate goals,
Hmm.
the long-term goals that you kind of want to see happening, and then the
Yeah.
final goal. And I
Hmm.
think those are three very different things in a character's arc, right? So you have
Yeah. Right.
these immediate goals, and I heard somebody say, don't feel like you have to have those like before the game starts. You can, but sometimes it's okay to like play a few sessions.
Yeah. Right.
And maybe when people get to level 2, maybe level 3, they begin to get a feel of who is this character.
Right.
Because you don't always have a feel for that. Sometimes you can write a nice backstory and you feel like you know your character, but then once you get playing them and the
Yeah.
way, the style they play, but also the style of like what they play in the party, the role,
Yeah.
begins to inform who they are and what they're after. And
Mm.
so maybe then by level 2 or 3, they actually know, hey, here's some things this character wants, like is like right away, immediate goals.
Yeah.
And then they they in thinking about when these happen,
Mm.
maybe a few sessions later, by sessions 4 through 7. Okay. You think about like as you're going through your progression on your chart, right? The first couple levels, you're just trying to figure out how your player works and you have no health and you're not amazing or anything yet at 1. That's why maybe 2 or 3 is when you're starting to get an idea of here's the things I really want to do now. But then when you start getting up to 4 to 7, you start getting an idea of, okay, what direction do I want this character to go? And that's when you can start thinking of long-term goals. What is it that this character is wanting to do long-term over the course of this campaign? And then maybe by the time you get to level 12 or 13, okay, I'm thinking here of a 20 level campaign arc. You may not go that long, okay? And in which case, these numbers are going to be different for you. But if we're starting a campaign and we're like, hey, I know we want to get to level 20 by the time we finish, that's kind of typically what we've done. We haven't done a lot of the whole go into epic and mythic tier
Right.
characters.
Yeah.
Some people do that. And if you're doing that, it's going to change it also. But if you're going to a level 20, by the time you get to level 12 or 13, that's when you should start to really have a good idea of this is my end goal, knowing kind of the world we're in now and what the GM has fed us and what, you know, my party is doing. This is what, and again, this isn't you saying, GM, this is the end of the campaign for
Right.
you.
Right.
The
Right.
GM has his own goal, right? As a GM. But like, even though I have my own goal and I know that this is where I'm going to bring everybody to know that they would love the thing that happens before the end of this game, the end goal for their character is boom.
Yeah.
You can begin to incorporate that. But the reason I say level 12 or 13 is you've got to have time to weave that in and make it feel believable, right? So if
Right.
you
Right.
if you wait till level 17 or 18 and you say, what do you want your end goal to be? Well, there might not be time because things get kind of moving fast at the end, typically. And so
Mhm.
by level 12 or 13, you have a real good feel for this character. You've begun to understand how you want them to develop. And then you can say, hey, this is where I want to end up by the time we get to the end. And your GM can really play with that. So when we say, you know your characters, your player characters' hopes and dreams and goals, well, those are going to be, there's different levels of those. It's not
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
I have one goal and that's going to be it. So like we're in a campaign right now where we started off and Adam said, hey, tell me about your past and what are some, what are some of your goals?
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't remember if we did that before we started playing, but like I gave him some family information and some very immediate goals. My brother was off. One of my brothers was off at the Golden Lyceum, being amazing, and I didn't like that. And my father wasn't caring for me and my younger brother, and so there were these things that that happened pretty immediately.
Yeah.
My brother got taken, and so one of my immediate goals was I want to get him back. Okay, that didn't end up being a long-term goal because we've already accomplished that now
Yeah.
before we're even halfway through. But that was an immediate goal. Then I
Right.
start looking at like, what are my long-term goals? And now he just asked us this week, hey, what kinds of things would you like to see at the end of this thing? That's
Yeah.
that kind of campaign capping goal. Where do you want your character to be at the end of this? What things do you want to see happen? And so I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind, that there's going to be different time levels.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I'm sitting here like it was just funny because you were mentioning like getting that from the way I do things, and I'm like learning as you're explaining what I did. Like, oh,
I did that. I came out. Yes, I'm
oh
like
yeah,
so.
yeah. No, that's cool. I like that too because I had been thinking through the setting like starting kind of goals and like during goals, but that I like that idea, that just like kind of rundown of like short term, long term, final, kind of
Yeah.
end game goals. That's a good way to think through that. And I like that too because I do think it's not a in my opinion, what the way I like to run things, it's not like a one and done kind of situation because one, people change and you may, I mean,
Right.
that's a really good point of like, you may, say something before the game even starts about like, this is what Josephus wants to do throughout this whole campaign. And I play like 2 sessions and realize that is not at all, I don't care, about that. And
Right.
but then maybe you're stuck and it's so like coming back to that and being able to reframe, I think as a player, like,
And it's like real
being,
life. Like
yeah,
we think we have
right.
these goals, but
Mhm.
then later we find out that maybe the goal is more the underlying motivation of that. So
Mm,
you may think,
yeah,
oh, well, my goal is to get a job doing this when I get out of college,
right.
but then you realize my goals are my values. I want to have this kind of life, and I want
Yeah,
to be
right,
able to and so that begins to determine more as you go.
right, right.
So the
Yeah,
same thing
yeah,
with your player characters. They
yeah,
they learn about themselves.
yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah, I think that's a really fun part of that too. Rob brought up a reminder, talked about this before, and then bringing it up here. The DM's Guide to Proactive Role Playing has excellent guidelines for helping set and incorporate PC goals. That's a cool like resource for that too. That book has come up in multiple conversations for me, and I feel like it's something that needs to get on my shelf pretty
The
soon
DM's
because
Guide to Proactive Role Playing.
Mhm.
Look it up.
Yep, for sure. So appreciate that, Rob. The Yeah, I like that, and I think a way I was thinking about as time went on, that I think fits with what you were talking about was even I saw like I'm picturing like almost a funnel kind of feel for the goals, and I'm wondering if like at the start it's good to have more broad things that get more specific as they you get closer to that level 20 or end game or whatever, where it's like maybe those goals are not quite so specific. Like I have to, I don't even can't think of one right now, but like I want to kill the Goblin King, like right away. Maybe that's a good driving force, but like maybe a thing of like I would like to have rulership of something one day, maybe a good way to start. And then
I
as
think
time goes on,
Well, I think here something I would say, and kind of just thought of this as you're talking
mhm.
about it, is I think different people do this differently.
Hmm,
So we do this thing we teach people called inductive studies, and then
hmm.
there's deductive, right? You can think
Yeah.
of inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning.
Hmm,
And it's the I forget which is which, as I think anyway. One of them you in goal setting here. Let's think inductive and
hmm,
deductive. Uh, those broad, some people have like these really broad ones
mhm.
early, and then as they go they get more and more specific, and that's how they come to what their end goal would be. But some people are the opposite in that they can't
Hmm.
think of those broad things, so all they can think of is like, okay, my character wants to get to the next town, he just knows he wants to get out of this town.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a short goal. Okay, he knows he wants to like learn to fight with two different kinds of weapons, and so he wants a sword and a bow, and there's like these very
Right.
little
Yeah, that's true.
things. And then as he goes, he begins to like those build into greater and greater
Mm,
goals that then become like these
yeah.
more far-reaching and over.
Okay.
But what I'm saying that is, it's just the way people think. I think
Right.
sometimes some people are going to think easier. I have small goal, small goal, small goal, small goal, small
Mhm.
goal. That's hard for me to say. And those things begin to add up to large goal.
Right. Right.
And so now I see this thing. Whereas other people aren't going to be like that. They're going to be like what you're
Mm,
talking about. They're going to be like, I think
yeah.
of these large goals, but then the longer I go, the more I'm narrowing down the exact thing that I
Right.
want my
Yeah.
guy to do. And
Interesting.
that may be different depending on the person.
That's true. That's true. So as from like a GM standpoint, it's more of that understanding your players in that
Yeah.
realm and those conversations, just like where do you want to go with this kind of thing.
And watching your players, because some
Yeah.
of them you're going to say, I want you to think of some large long-term goals. And they're going to be like, but you can say, I want you to think of some concrete small goals. And
Yeah.
they're going to be
Right.
like, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
There's going to be other people who immediately, they're not thinking of like small things. They're thinking of
Mhm.
huge things. And I think
Yeah. Yeah.
you'll start to kind of catch who's who
Hmm.
as you watch.
Yeah. For sure. Something you said in there kind of made my mind go here too. Like, how do we, or how have you maybe, or how could we um, balance the goals of a player and the goals of a character kind of thing? I think because I think like that can be, that sounds kind of weird, but that can be like a different thing, where it's like
Hmm.
I'm thinking as far as like, okay, what was my character? Um, Cormac wanted vengeance. That's what he wanted, like for the death of his family. There was that part of him, and like what was the purpose of this kind of thing. But like as a player, I can be even thinking, well, complete vengeance on that may not be the most interesting thing, but I have a goal of like Cormac finding peace in the end, kind of deal. And I'm just kind of
Right.
spitballing here. Those are different. Is there a way to encourage or like help seed that for people to like help them like work through that? I don't know. Have you seen that at
Yeah.
all?
I hadn't thought of that kind of dichotomy necessarily.
Hmm.
So I would have to think about that. I
Yeah.
have thought about the idea that there are different kinds of goals, and maybe this is just one level of that kind of
Hmm.
meta goal, player
Yeah.
goal.
Right.
But so I think that when I'm thinking about goals, I have to think in arenas, different kinds of goals.
Hmm.
So I think for me, I think relational goals. What kind of relationship goals do I have?
Okay.
So I'm going to put this all in terms of the character I'm playing now. When I
Yeah.
started, it had very much to do with my father and my two brothers. That was like I had relational goals. And now that we've gone through this, I have a goal that I don't think the GM knows yet because I haven't really, I mean, I've hinted at it pretty hard, but my brother married this girl and his sister has become kind of an object of thought for my character, and so he wants something more to happen with Pandora in this. Those are all relational goals. Those don't have to do with the broader story, right? We're there's these ley lines holding in these titans, and there's a god or a demigod, who's like wanting to break this all apart because of whatever his name's Barrister, and he's coming in. Those, you know, Pandora and my brothers and stuff, they may tie into those larger things eventually, story wise. But for me, they're relational goals right now, which then is different than story goals, which I'm going to hold off till the third thing. But in the middle there, I have power goals. So as a player, don't underestimate the fact that everybody wants to be awesome. That's part of their goals. You don't want to get a character who's like, I want my guy to eventually just be a sheep herder sitting on the side of a hill. Maybe eventually, if you ever read the Assassin's Apprentice stories, at the very end, he's just sitting with his wolf, whatever.
Spoiler.
Spoiler alert. Sorry if you're reading those. What was I saying? Oh, yes, power goals. Often we will, as players, be like, oh, I have a goal to get to where I can do this and this and this, and some of that is going to be dictated by your progression, right? If you're a monk, you want to get to where you can do the quivering palm or whatever that is,
right.
perfect body, which nobody ever gets to because who played all the way to 20 with a monk without doing one level of something else? I don't know. Maybe somebody does. I've never gotten to the perfect diamond body or whatever it is. I see it and I'm like, is that really worth it? It's cool, but I'm not shooting. Anyway, so power goals, right? And so I can, again, go back to kind of who my character is right now. My character is an artificer who has this gun kind of built into his arm that flips out. And, he has these goals of increasing what that can do. And so at first, and so far in our story, it's been, it started off as like basically the equivalent of a pistol if you were in like a game that had guns, which we don't necessarily. This Thunder Slinger is still magic. But it had a certain range and a certain shot kind of form, and it was projectile damage. Well, then he wanted to upgrade that to a radiant damage that shot further. It would be more like a laser rifle if you were in the gun realm, right? And then his last incarnation is it's become an antimatter type of gun. It's become this necrotic thing, right? Just in time for us to fight all these undead things. Just perfect timing. And that wasn't the GM wasn't doing anything. I knew we were going to that long before I came up with the idea of this necrotic dealing gun. So far it's been like increasing in power, but now my character is, and the GM doesn't know this yet because I have all these thoughts and I've told him none of this in those little surveys he keeps asking me about. But like now I'm wanting to learn to make these cartridges that go in that do different kinds of shooting of things that are not necessarily increasing power. They're changing types, but not just types of power and damage, but things like truth serums and other kinds of things, because my character really wants to go into this IPS, the in plain sight, hidden in plain sight, sort of like the CIA, undercover, super deep. Nobody knows who's who. It's the gray man, but he wants to use this Thunder Slinger. And so so I have these power goals, right? So I have relational goals, I have power goals, and then there's story goals. And the story goals are going to be those things that are the broader, what's happening in the world, what's happening politically, what's happening, based on that. Maybe that's more along the lines of what my GM is bringing in as the story so far. And so I think, so I would add on that thing you just said there, the player goals. That's the meta goals, right?
Right.
I think it's important for us as GMs to kind of bring these thoughts to our player characters, because often we don't think about the fact that there are different kinds of goals in our life, in our players' lives, right? What's your goal? And we think of
Yeah.
one. Maybe it would do us good to think, okay, what are my relationship goals? What are my power goals? And what are
Yeah.
my story goals?
For
And what
sure.
are my meta goals? What is
Hmm.
it that I want my character to get to? Like you were talking about, I want Cormac to actually get to this place of peace, even though he
Right.
thinks his ultimate goal is revenge on all orcs
Yeah.
that ever lived. But I
Yeah.
know as a player, I want him to get to here. Those are
Right.
different kinds of
Yeah. Yeah.
goals.
Yeah.
And so to bring up to your characters, they don't have to necessarily fill out all four of these types in detail for you, but
Mm.
to have thought through, do you have relationship, story, power, and meta goals that, think through those four. Maybe you won't have, one of those. Maybe you don't have a meta goal for your, or maybe you don't
Yeah.
have power goals necessarily, or
Mm.
maybe you just never thought of it.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah. That's good. So relational power, story, and the meta kind of been added one there. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. So if we have goals made, so we've got some goals made, or they've been expressed, which I highly recommend like working that. And the sorry, I'm gonna backtrack for a second. That long term or end goals kind of idea that you brought up, like the thing I was thinking through this week after I kind of had sent that form for the players to fill out was like, okay, it's never too late. Like it's never too late to build some goals. I
Right.
do think, like you said, like if you're at level 19 and you're going to level 20, maybe it is
It's a
too
little
late,
harder
but
as the GM to integrate some
yeah,
of
right,
their
right.
great ideas
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
seamlessly and make it feel
Yeah.
natural and like the world just grew that way.
Right. Right. Yeah,
Organic. That's the
absolutely.
word I'm looking for.
Yeah,
Make it feel
the organic
organic.
pieces of it. Yeah. So I guess I need to reframe. It can be too late, but it's like
It's not yet.
it's not as like far as maybe what it feels like. Like sometimes I think it's like, oh, I needed to set these goals at the very beginning, and that's not. But I do think like being intentional and being regular about like checking up. I don't think it's a like every session kind of thing where it's like every session I got to figure out like, well, here, what's your goals, kind of thing. But I wanted to have that as a GM, like have those conversations regularly enough that it's like we can adjust and do that. But kind of where I was going was, okay, so we have some goals that we've like talked to people about. We talked to our players, they've expressed, hey, here's some relational goals, or here's some story goals, or just kind of like where we're wanting to go from a power standpoint, what I want for my character as a player, kind of stuff. Like thinking about how to like integrate those, like practically do that. um I think like one of the things I like to do is to not just I'm going to go back to, okay, the goal is I want to kill the Goblin King and take over, and it's like, okay, so that's been expressed, and then next session you meet the Goblin King and you kill him, and now it's like that's not probably. I mean, it's like, well, you got the goal, but like that's probably not super there's not a lot of satisfaction
Right.
probably to that. You're right. So being able to start to drip hints, I think, is important. Going back to that word of just like dripping things of, as they're going about their exploration or adventuring or whatever, catching signs of the goblins that like, oh, well, maybe the Goblin King is near, or there's like the Goblin King came in and destroyed this village. They're not too far away, or like even a challenge at some point. Maybe the Goblin King pounds them into the dirt, the first time they meet him, and there's like stuff there that happens, to be able to build up to a goal being met rather than just like, oh, now it's done. Because I
The
think
two
I've
the
had
two
that
great
before.
satisfactions are conflict and anticipation,
Mm,
right? You
yeah.
have any story, if you're like, I want to kill the Goblin King, and then the very next time it's like, and he killed the Goblin King, you'd be like, this story stunk. Why I hated this story, you know. And there are authors that are like that. They make this thing seem big, and then the very next chapter they solve it, and then they make another thing seem big, and then they solve it, and you feel very unsatisfied because of two things. The conflict wasn't that great,
Yeah.
and there
Right.
was like very little anticipation. What makes a great author and what makes a great GM is when you can begin to build anticipation by the drip, right? A
Yeah.
little
Right.
bit
Right.
here, a little bit here, a little bit here. And the more people think about something, the greater. I've heard it said, and maybe I've said it on here, is that, you know, we do things because the dopamine rush, right? Well, the
Mm.
dopamine rush is greatest in the anticipation of getting
Mm.
anything more than in the getting. And we find this with
Right.
people, you know, expecting to get a lot of money. They think when they get a lot of money, they're going to be like super excited, but it's the anticipation that
Hmm.
is more dopamine than the actual once you have it. And it's the
Interesting.
same thing with most things you get. And I think
Hmm.
we can all, you know, oh, if I get this Rubik's Cube, I'm going to be so happy. You get the
Yeah.
Rubik's Cube, it's like, okay, that's cool. And then 2 days later, it's sitting over there. It was the anticipation that you thought about as a kid.
Yeah.
I don't know who anticipated getting a Rubik's Cube, by the way. That was like the first thing that came to my head. But maybe, you know, whatever it is,
New dice.
it's that it's that anticipation with getting it that brings the most thought and excitement and like your mind working on it, and the fact that it's hard to get to and it almost seems like it might not happen. The conflict, you know, it's
Yeah.
what was it we said? We were talking about the Brandon Sanderson thing. It's like it looks like you're getting it all, but then there's the false, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Like a
oh
false summit
no,
kind of thing.
everything
Or yeah.
fell away, and now
Yeah.
it looks like it's going to be, you know, it's impossible. Wait,
Yeah.
no, there's a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those two things, I think you're right. Can you, as a GM, take their goals and make anticipation, but also conflict, make it
Yeah.
hard,
Yeah.
so that when they realize these goals, it feels worth it. It feels
Yeah. Yeah.
satisfying.
It's worked for. What is that food that was worked for is the sweeter, or I don't know, maybe I'm just making that up. But the
It's
yeah,
sweeter
the
than food somebody gives you. That's a proverb. Just look it up.
it's somewhere out there. Uh,
I want to say something here too. I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off,
no,
but
you're fine.
I see in our comments
Mm.
the Watai Hotel said there's a great survey out there, and then you ask, is there a link for that?
Yeah.
And he's going to send it. I just want to say this real quick. One of the things that I think about when it's this idea of with players building goals and hopes, there's a variety of ways to do that. I think the session 0 is the beginning, and that's doing that together in person. What do we want this to be? Hey, what kinds of things are you looking for? And people are kind of brainstorming that together. There are polls. So you just sent out a poll
Right.
asking us some questions. And the
Right.
beautiful thing about that is I begin to think about that when I'm not sitting at the table, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because you need time for that. And, you know, if I'm sitting at the table and you ask me, what's your goal? I'm going to be like, I want to do this. And it's not going to be great. But then I also think as a GM, now, granted, this is not easy for everybody, but I think having those one-on-one conversations, I think the poll is great to get people started thinking,
Yeah.
but there's going to be some people like yours truly who aren't very good at filling out the poll and sending it back. But then you, like,
Right.
after you've already got me thinking about that, then you sit down and say, hey, I don't know if you got a chance to think about that. Oh man, I'm going to start talking like crazy because I have all these
Right.
ideas, but I'm just not very good at
Yeah. For
send
sure.
it back,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, those less administrative types of people. So it's good to have a questionnaire or a poll or a survey, but don't send that out. And then when like only one person sends it back or two people say, man, my players just stink. Don't assume that they haven't thought about that.
Yeah. Right.
Some of them, that's just not going to be their preferred way. And so finding a way to talk to them outside of the game thing, to have a moment where you're not playing the game,
Yeah.
you can say, hey, what kind of thoughts did you have on that? And then maybe they'll be like, you know what, I'll just write those down and hand them to you, or I'll just talk them out.
Yeah.
But do know that that's an important part of that. So it's
Yeah,
not
for sure.
it's just like anything we do in life, whether it's schoolwork or fundraising or whatever it is. You can think if I send it, everybody's going to turn it in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't always happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That was when we played the Interface Zero game while you're on sabbatical, right? So that was last spring. That was the thing that, I got, excuse me, had a call. I'm the player in that situation, but having that call and talking through definitely helped me to like verbally process some things that I was kind of like half thinking through, but it's like, oh yeah, this is clicking now to just have this question. So yeah,
Rob Henry is being very passive aggressive with me here. He said, or you can just do the thing that makes the game better for everyone. It's true. And I will say, sometimes I have to have that kick, right? But what Royal did, who was running that game, he did send that out. And when everybody didn't do what they should do to make the game better for everybody, he did call people. And he actually, that was his plan before. He wanted to like have a call with each person to talk through that. And it does help.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, following through is good. But so the -$1 rolls until the survey is filled out. Yeah. De-inspiration for everyone.
And it's a cumulative. It's like that what was that die we used to increase as the battle went on? What was that called?
Escalation die.
Escalation.
Yeah.
That's what it can be. It can be the escalation survey.
The de-escalation.
Every session you don't turn it in, it gets turned up one more. Now it's a -2 to all rolls. Now it's a -3 to all rolls. Now it's a -6 to all rolls. Pretty soon they're going to fill it out.
Yeah.
Of course, by then 6 sessions. My goodness,
they're all dead.
Too long.
The final kind of thought I had with like what to do as a GM. Something that I want to do better at is so if somebody gives me a goal. Again, in this situation, we're kind of talking more into goals and like tying up of threads and things like that. But somebody gives that to me. I kind of want to think through the elements of of just like role-playing games a little bit as I'm thinking through those. And even Matthew used like that term, like, like the pillars of role-playing. We were talking about like combat and exploration and it was like the social
RP,
those kind of things. And I think that's like a worthwhile thing to like consider too, when somebody drops a goal in. It's like, okay, how I keep using this, but it's like, okay, killing the Goblin King, taking his throne. Okay. What does that look like from a combat? That's a little easier for me. It's like combat seems to be the thing. They want to have a combat with the Goblin King that they can win. How, they may need to lie, cheat, and steal to be able to do it, or they may just get powerful enough to make it happen. But that's going to have to be some sort of an actual like encounter in that realm. But like maybe there's what kind of role playing needs to go into meeting this goal. Like maybe they need to go and like win some allies over, or they need to go just intimidate and challenge this king. Like what is that part that's going to help fulfill this role? And again, it may not all happen at once, but maybe there's some role playing that takes part in that. And then just like other elements, I mean, even like the discovery and or exploration and things like that. Other pieces, I think we can break that down a little more. But again, it's like you could probably go too far with that, but I think it's like worth thinking through as we think about like, okay, how do we help this move towards a goal for somebody? I don't want to just be in a position where I'm like scrambling to like, how do I connect this in? I think if we think through some of those, it helps to like tie it in and integrate it a little more with like what's going on in the full group story. Because you don't want to forget about the other, 4 people or whatever in your table as you're going after that too. So.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that as a GM that's tough to do is to do 2 things. And I think this like leads to the satisfaction better. One is to help your players understand what's their motivation? Why do they want this goal? Because you'll
Right.
ask your character sometimes, what's your goal? And they're like, well, I want to have my own kingdom, and I want to be like the most powerful man in the world. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Now, why does your character want that?
Right.
And when they start to ask that question
Why?
of their
Yeah.
character and answer those questions, then it's going to become a lot more meaningful to them
Yeah.
than just like, I want to kill every, opponent that ever was. I want to be awesome. To know your why. So like even with those relational goals I was talking about earlier, it's a typical thing for people to be like, oh yeah, I want to, that girl PC that we met, I want to like get to know her better. Okay. Why does your character
Why?
want that?
Yeah.
And then to go into like more depth.
Yeah. Build that story. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was going to say this, and that is, do as a GM think about like, how do you balance all of these, right? So you got, let's say you have 4 players, 5 players, 6 players, whatever it is. They're all going to have their goals. Well, how do you work this out so that what you're doing for this person's goals is not working directly opposed to what this person's goal
Right.
is? Or does that increase the tension, and then the players, have to like work something out there? But as a GM, you need to think about this. I am like furthering the goals of 4, 5, 6 people, not just one person. And how do I do that in a fun way?
Right. Yeah, for sure. I love that. Got any other thoughts on it?
Let's see. My notes that I was thinking about here. I think one thing to think about is how you're going to necessarily incorporate some of these goals. So let's say I talked to you about power goals, and maybe your guy is like, I want to really get to where I can do, I can't even think of something off the top of my head. 2-weapon fighting is actually a feat progression, and so that's easy. But like, let's say, okay, so my guy who I'm talking about with this thunder slinger he has, where he puts these different canisters in, he's wanting to develop new types, and so like his goal is, I want to have like 5 different types of energy that I can do damage with. Well, that's not like a progression chart. And so you as the GM, you don't want to sit there during your game time and be like, okay, you're working on this, and you suddenly start to have these, clues about this. So I think what I'm trying to get to is, there's going to be some times that like in your goal progression stuff, working with your players, you're going to like give them little training montages or stuff outside of game time that your character, tell me what your character does in trying to learn a new, to do acid damage, because you're not a mage. You're a guy who has this like a thunder slinger, this like gun like thing. What are you going to do to make acid damage a reality? And that's not something you're going to do necessarily in your game session, but you're going to like ask them, how do you see that playing out? And like, let them give you some training montage or some like ideas. Then maybe you can work some of that into your story, but like, you're not necessarily going to solve or reach every goal. When we talk about the 3 levels, immediate goals, kind of long-term goals, in-cap goals, some of those intermediate goals or those immediate goals, you're going to do outside of things.
Yeah. I like that too, because it helps to maintain that focus while still moving that forward. I think it's good.
You can like again, the stuff that say my character wants to be in the IPS, the in plain sight, kind of the CIA deep cover thing. You begin to give me some information about that when we're not in games. Then influences the way I play the stuff you bring out during the game session. I make choices based on what we're doing outside. Again, don't get so involved that you spend every waking moment working with each player, to do these. As a GM, realize that you have a limited amount of time too, and you also have a job, hopefully, and you also have a wife and a family that you have to spend time with, and don't make everything about your game, but occasionally, do some outside stuff.
Yeah. I think like too, maybe considering how things like cross with each other. too. So like, and I don't think it needs to be like in a lazy way of like I'm just going to connect all these things together and everything is like fulfilled by one deal. I don't know that needs to happen, but there may be points if someone if two players have a goal that can actually kind of align
Right.
together, where it's like um
And that ties
my
your players together.
yeah, it's like, my exactly. That's the thing that connects them more where, somebody my my dog was killed by some mysterious figure and I want to like get revenge on them, and this other person who wants to kill the Goblin King and sit on its throne. Well, as time goes on, we're realizing, well, the Goblin King was the one that killed the dog, kind of thing. And like
Those are
they
it's like somebody killed my dog,
seeing how
and
my
I
game.
want to kill the
Hey,
Goblin King and rule
isn't that
over
the
all
whole
goblins.
John Wick thing? Like he killed his dog.
I've never
Um,
watched or heard of John Wick's story. I need to watch that.
that's pretty much what I know. And then he just kills everybody, I think. But the uh that like, there may be, and that's probably a little heavy handed, but like that kind of tie in as the game goes on, realizing clues are kind of leading together, and it's like this realization of like we have a common goal in this for different reasons, but we can work together even in that. I think that could be an interesting tie-in of how can those things that the players are giving us also at least intertwine or parallel each other or intersect at different portions. There's kind of a lot of juggling that happens there, but I think that could bring in some cool complications and interest also for that.
And it's kind of what so one of our viewers right now said it's hard to do that without spoiling, like getting their goals in intertwined, to do that without spoiling what you've already planned or making it feel shoehorned in. And
Yeah.
I do think that's important. You don't just like the first time somebody tells you about a goal, like the next session, you're like shove it in, even if it doesn't fit.
Right. Yeah.
It is a lot about, I talk about sitting down with your journal and doing the what if, or,
Mm,
just kind of imagining how
yeah.
these things could begin to intertwine and twine with other people's stories. It can be work sometimes, but it definitely makes it, when it feels more organic and it feels like it grew in the story rather
Yeah.
than just being shoved in. It does. It's that, along with that anticipation and that challenge, makes
Mhm.
it feel so much more exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Rob brought up having the players talk about how their goals can align and
Yeah.
adapting the story, and I feel like that can be a cool like meta conversation, but that also is an opportunity for RP, and I'm definitely a believer in the like, hey, you're traveling for several days. One of these nights when you're all around the campfire, a conversation springs up about X, kind of thing, and even just saying like, for whatever reason, a conversation about your goals pops up and you kind of like leave it and let people talk. I think feeding that can be a really good thing. So that's an opportunity, whether it's meta or in-game conversation, for people to do that. And then you can kind of take notes and see, oh, these actually do connect in different ways. And you guys had conversations about like, why are we together? I mean, that was like a legitimate conversation at one point. An arc had kind of finished, and you're like, well, we don't care at all about this thieves guild, and we
Which is
hate
why we
the
were
leader of
together.
the yeah, and it's why
Right.
it's like, and we don't like the leader anymore. So do we need to continue? And I'm sitting there as the GM, like, okay, if they decide not to, that needs to be okay, kind of thing. But we also need to figure out how the game continues, or maybe it doesn't continue, maybe it's done, kind of thing. And you guys, through that conversation, decided, that we have reason to do this. If nothing else, it's like the bond that, and we're gonna go south for a while, and then it kind of turned into more, and you got bound back together again. But I thought that was cool to even see. It wasn't necessarily all about a goal, but I know like you were like, I got to find my brother, and there were a few
Mhm.
people who were like, well, if that's the case, we're with you, and a few other people were like, well, I need to go south. We're all going south, so let's go south together. And then that eventually connected. So it was cool to see kind
And
of what Rob's saying there happen. Yeah.
Perfect example here of him kind of tying some together. So my goal was I had to find my younger brother who was enslaved somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, another one of our party needed to get to the Underdark because he was a dark elf, and his mother was the queen. I don't know if she's the queen of all the dark elves. I should know.
She's kind of the leader of that city. Yeah.
Leader of that city.
Yeah.
Well, it ended up that my brother had been taken to that city in the Underdark, and so then there's a reason for both of us to want to be going to the same place and doing the same things, and so you begin to like. And it didn't feel shoehorned at all. It didn't feel like he's like, oh, and by the way, your brother is now, it's like he knew those things separately. I didn't even know that Josh was like trying to do anything with the Underdark and his mother, or he evidently has a fiance or something down there. I didn't even know for the longest time. He's hitting on all these giants that we pass, giant women. Anyway, he can get after me for that later. But yeah. I had another thought, but then I totally blew it out of my own mind. And that is this. That a lot of times, we have these little NPCs that we talk about at the end of every episode. And I do think when you find an NPC that a player clicks with, use that NPC, talk through that NPC to find out why the player's doing anything. Because doing it in character through an NPC, they sometimes are more forthcoming and like get more into why their character's doing what they're doing than they will if you just ask them as the GM.
Yeah. Right.
So use those NPCs. And if you don't have any NPC ideas, use the ones we throw out on here. Find a way to work them in, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I see a lot of stuff happening in the comments after I talk about Josh. So Thalra is her name. Okay. Yeah. So he basically loves a bunch of giants and still has a fiance. That's basically what we're getting here.
Well, speaking of NPCs.
Yeah, let's move to that portion.
Yes. That was good. And I think goals are a great thing.
They are.
Moving to that though, maybe an NPC that you could speak some goals through. This is or ask questions about goals. Is Nestor Lancaster.
Nestor Molester.
Nestor Lancaster.
Nestor Lancaster.
No. Oh no. No. This is a refugee healer. He says, I can heal your comrade if you would see to take me with you. He's this frail-looking youth with ill-fitting clothes who glances around as if terrified of the world around him. Nestor is obviously well-educated with proper diction and manners, but acts nervous and scared as he speaks with you. It comes from the brutal murder of his family members that scarred Nestor with a lifelong fear of violence, or even the possibility of violence. Aside from that fear, he's exceedingly cerebral and driven to learn all he can of healing. His motivation is that he wishes only to survive and escape to somewhere safer, preferably with someone strong. And his background is this. He's a child prodigy of the healing arts. Nestor was the youngest of an ill-fated Lancaster noble clan. Betrayal by a supposed family ally led to a brutal slaughter of his entire clan. Nestor escaped the carnage, but wound up living on the streets, a life that the jittery, wounded boy was not at all suited for. Scarred deeply by the horrors of his past, Nestor doesn't know who he can trust, if anyone. He's not interested in politics or revenge. He only escaped from the violence that took his family. After reaching a safe haven, Nestor will almost certainly bury himself in study and practice of the healing arts. So this is Nestor Lancaster. Yeah. So I feel like this is like an interesting one to play out. Like, I think his personality is interesting. How do you feel like he would connect with a group though? Because I get a little hung up with the, like, he really wants to be like with somebody strong and find a safe place, but your party is typically going to be people plunging themselves into danger. So like, I don't know like how that exactly looks like
for me.
for him. Mm-hmm.
this is not an easy character for me to play. I don't play like the really timid characters well. I'm like a very bombastic personality when I get on a game table. Not always bombastic in my real life, but so it'd be a little harder for me to like kind of play that meek character. But he's perfect for okay. How many times have you had a party that you're part of or you're GMing and they decide, you know what, we don't have any healers. We need to find ourselves a heal bot. And they look for a guy to be their heal bot. Well, this is the kind of one that can be useful, in my opinion, because of two things. One, he wants to get away from where he's at. And so he does no healing and he wants to go with you. Okay, well, that's all great. That sounds great for your party, right? Heal bot. But he also doesn't want to be around violence. So whenever you guys like plunge into this like crazy thing, he wants to pull back. And so he can be the kind of guy who can heal you, but he also kind of wants to run away. And then like, if you get done and you need some healing, maybe he can help you out, but he doesn't want to stay with you too long. And so you can always, as a GM, be this, like he wants to get away from where he's at, but he also doesn't want to be in all the things you're in. And so it's not just like he's your vending machine of healing. Because you can kind of pull him out sometimes.
Right.
But he can also help out because your party is so power hungry that nobody wants to play the healer. So I think that's where this kind of NPC can work for me.
Yeah. I like that. I think even maybe playing that complication is interesting. Watai Hotel threw that same idea out. Definitely a bad NPC for a murder hobo party. It's hard to, but I think, like the tension of that is important. I like the idea, which it's saying in that, he doesn't care about the politics or the revenge, but I do find that, and I like that about him, is that I would expect them to be like, I'm the only one that survived. I want to find judgment or justice for all this and stuff, and he's just like, I want to get out of here. But I do find that
he does want to live his life as a sheep herder someday, just sitting on the hillside.
It's just be able to go and study, and learn how to heal better. But I do think like the story hook is kind of interesting. That story is interesting to me, and that there could be a hook in that, even if he's not interested. Maybe there's more that can be found by the party, kind of thing. I also like this idea about like him being a prodigy. I think that's kind of an interesting piece. I don't know how to do that too much with spotlighting an NPC, but if it's like there's something more about this person, maybe there's a prophecy out there about this like healer that's to come, who is going to like be way more amazing than anything they've ever seen before. And it's like, well, we came across this guy who's a prodigy, but he's kind of unsure about his, like the way he lives out, but maybe there's something more going on here. I like that for like story hooks kind of thing with him. Or he could just be a really timid person that you come across, get healed up, and then move past, kind of thing too. It depends on what the group wants from them. So, but I think there's some interesting stuff. That's one too, where I think you could see some like character development with an NPC, which I do think is important just in general. As people, it's not that like video game situation where everybody is the exact same every time you come across them. That could be interesting to see, like, does he find a safe spot, and then like there is like healing that takes place in this where he gets more confident, or does he deteriorate into something else because of this plague of like horrors that he's like dealt with, kind of thing. I think that's kind of interesting things to see over time with NPCs as well.
Yeah. I like this idea of somebody who like really is interested in studying all about healing, but he's not wanting to be out there necessarily where like all the people need healed. He doesn't want to be around the dangerous stuff. I think that's kind of interesting. It could be this like super intelligent, knows how to heal, more interested in the spark of life than necessarily helping people. Maybe, so we'll see.
He faints every time he sees blood. I'd be really good at this if I
perfect doctor.
That kind of thing. So that's
all right. Let's hit. Do we even have time for a Haversack question?
I think we got time for a couple here.
Let's hit just a little bit here, and then we'll wrap up this Rise episode.
Cool. So Watai Hotel, who is in our chat, got one from him, and the basic idea is watches during travel, but it reads like this. This is the Watchmen edition. Dear Matthew and Adam, sorry for the belated email. I kept forgetting to send it in. However, I wanted to ask you what you thought about the concept of having your PCs set up watches during travel, especially having your party make rolls for watches. I was listening to another D&D podcast, Gasp, and they made a
What?
point. That's totally awesome.
Yes, we
They
encourage
made,
it.
yeah, definitely. They made the point that while watches are interesting, anytime a DM asks you to roll for a watch, you can assume that there's probably something that's going to happen regardless of your roll. And if nothing happens, it feels pointless. Essentially, they argued that while they like the concept of watches, they do want to find some sort of way to tweak it. What are your thoughts on this idea? Are watches mechanically flawed? If so, is there some way to fix them? Or are they just fine using rules as written? Thank you for your wonderful podcast. Sincerely, Watai Hotel 98.
Oh man, no,
So,
I disagree. I think the idea of them all deciding when they're going to do watches and then you like picking one of them being like, all right, I need you to roll, and they
yeah,
roll. Uh, Sometimes I don't have anything. Yeah, there's nothing going to
yeah,
happen. I'm just making them roll, and I'm like, okay, you guys all wake up the next day, and in their mind they're like, oh my goodness, did we miss something? And they start getting nervous, or they're like, good thing we were watching because I rolled
yeah,
well, or,
yeah,
but then sometimes I really am going to have something come in at some point in the night, depending on how they decided to set the watch. I've already decided it's going to be in the third watch, whatever the third watch
yeah,
is,
right.
whoever the third one is. Maybe they're perfect for that watch and they, have great perception and they catch them coming in, or maybe they're really bad. And, that's just I like them having to decide the watch hour when I've
Yeah,
already pre-decided
yeah,
during this watch, or I pre-decided that nothing's going to happen this night, but I'm going to have somebody roll and be really nervous about what they might have missed
yeah,
during the night
right.
or whatever.
Yeah,
So I don't feel like they're naturally flawed, but just because I have somebody roll something doesn't mean that there was automatically something there. Sometimes I like to have people
yeah,
roll. Sometimes I'll even do this, and I think Adam does this too. Sometimes I'll just be in the middle of a game and I'll be like, I need you to roll a D20. Okay.
yeah.
Absolutely nothing happening in my mind. I just sometimes want them to like wonder, what did
Yeah,
I just roll for?
right.
What just
Yeah,
happened? And they get real, looking around, and then they're trying to figure everything out. Sometimes it pulls people into a game
yeah,
to have
right. Yeah,
especially if there's somebody sitting over there that's like kind of on their phone and like
mhm,
doing something on the side, and you think maybe
yeah,
they're watching a ball game or doing some homework, and you're like, hey, I need you to give me a D20 roll. Okay, I need one more. All right. Okay.
yeah,
And then they're like, oh, wait, what's going
yeah,
on here? They come back into the game. So
yeah.
watches, hey, I'm all for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can use that for like drawing back in for sure. I'm like my style typically for this kind of thing is I know we talked about this with like random encounters, I think a little bit before, where I don't typically go the random encounter route randomly, if that makes sense. Like it always kind of
He has
I want it.
planned random
I've had
encounters.
planned a random account. It's like I want I want typically I want things to like be for a purpose
Right.
in like our long-term games kind of thing. And that may be a random encounter of you're out in the grasslands and you get attacked by cheetahs, kind of thing. But like I also want that to be a reason. And even if the reason is like I'm setting a tone for the location you're in,
Right.
is this is the kind of place that you get attacked by cheetahs, kind of deal, or which is probably a terrible example, but um,
It's great.
you know, uh, that kind of thing. So in that realm, I would probably have something in my brain that is like, this is happening. But then like what
Right.
you were talking about of like, hey, there's five of you, let's roll a D6, drop the six, you're each a number. What or like what watch is going to happen, because I do think there's something about, and maybe it's just like no matter what the person who it lands on sees something and then they wake everybody up and then it's the same. But I think like there can be differences of like, okay, this person has a garbage perception, but it landed on them. So there's going to actually have like a surprise as the cheetah jumps on them and tries to eat them
Right in the middle of camp. Yeah. Just
right in the middle of
jumps
camp.
in.
And that's going to change things than like the sharp-eyed, ranger who's like up in the tree watching hardcore and sees everything. And they are able to like warn everybody. That's going to be different. So I like the idea, like that's how I typically would go, but I do think there's some things about maybe the consistency of like the consistency. And Rob said randomly encountered does not necessarily have to mean unplanned. Like, and I think that is true with that. But I think like if we wanted to go the other way, which is not my typical style, but like I think maybe having like consistency in, okay, every time you travel, I'm asking, what are the watches? What are these things? Making some rolls, it may come out to nothing. It may be like I roll D20, and if it rolls a 1, that means something actually happens, because I don't really want anything to happen tonight, but I also want to give some randomness to the travel. And that can change. If I really, really want something to happen, maybe it's 1 through 17. If I roll this, there's going to be something happen. It's much less of a chance, if that makes sense too, to give some randomness to it. But I like the idea of, if we're going to do this thing to see random encounters, then maybe it needs to be a little more consistent with it. But that's not my typical style. It's like I'm planning something and making it random and when it happens versus just full random out. But different play styles too. I don't know if that answered that question at all, but that's the thoughts that kind of came into my brain.
Yeah. So that's our thoughts on watches. Is there another haversack, or is that it for today?
I think that probably should be it for today. We do have a few more rattling around in there, but we'll save them.
That's going to be it for us for Rise of the GM today. Guys, I always enjoy these, talking about hopes and goals and how you as a GM get people invested in the game. And I hope all of you enjoy that part of it too, as well as running combat and role playing and stuff. So hopefully today was useful. We'll be back next time with what, Adam? What are we talking about next time? We are talking
fizzled campaigns that did not go to the very end. We did not get to see the end goals achieved. So
join us next time to talk about those that fizzle here on Rise of the GM. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you then.
Thanks all.
Bye, guys.